Good morning. Today we will have a word round discussion on wound infection, followed by a discussion on operative steps for open inguinal hernioplasty. To me, it will be today Dr. Sanjay Mohan Bhattacharya, who is professor and head of surgery at Vivekananda Institute of Medical Sciences. I find Dr. Acharya is also there with us. So we'll start with the scenario. Nadeem,
yes, sir.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, please read the scenario and wait for the question.
Okay, sir.
Good morning, Anarita.
Okay, sir. So, a 45 underwent right hemicolectomy for CA cecum. He was recovering well today, being the 5th post-op day. Complain of pain along the wound site and mild fever. So we have a post-op patient of right hemicolectomy for CA cecum of POD 5 when he started complaining of pain along the wound site with mild fever.
Okay. Dr. Bhattacharya.
Yeah. Good morning, Nadeem. So you have done a right hemicolectomy, and it is day 5. Patient is doing fine, but you saw whenever you have gone to your round, so you have seen the patient is having the pain along the wound side along with the fever. So how you are going to examine your patient and assess your patient? Can you tell me how you are going to assess your patient on the 5th day?
Okay, sir. So since he's having a pain along the wound site, I would first like to assess the wound site itself, whether there are any signs of local inflammation or any pus discharge or abscess formation along the wound site, sir. Basically to check for any wound infection. Along with that, sir, I would also be sending the routine investigations, preferably the complete blood count to check the total leukocyte count, whether it is raised or not.
Okay. So are you only examining the operated site, or you should examine the other abdominal quadrant as well?
So I will first examine the local site, but I will also rule out whether it is a systemic or a spreading infection or not by assessing the other parts as well, sir.
Okay. Suppose
the Dr. Nadeem, whenever such ward round scenario is set, always keep in mind that the basic steps for managing such patient will be taking a good history again. You are told pain on the wound site and mild fever. So it has got a lot of implications. So don't jump to the wound examination. You again talk to the patient. When in the ward, you talk to the patient whether he has got any other symptom apart from this. And if he has got pain in the wound site, how severe is this pain? Is a mild pain or pain is severe? He is having a throbbing type of pain and he has got fever. Fever in the 5th post-op day may have some other implications. So you should ask about other symptoms of respiratory system, any swelling in the legs, which may indicate associated deep vein thrombosis. So the steps will be take a good history, then examine the patient, examine the patient vitals, examine the patient other part, and then examine the wound. And then you plan management. Okay, so don't jump to the examination first. Keep in mind that always in our scenario, you should take the history, do a good general examination and the local examination. Dr. Bhattacharya, please.
Yeah, rightly said, Makhanda, Dr. Nadeem. So you should check at least the history. From the history, what you can you assess something, the etiology or the cause of this fever?
Yes, sir. If you are talking particularly per se about a wound infection or any other cause that could cause a post-op fever, it can be pointed out from the history itself, as if whether the patient is diabetic or not, or like etiology.
The predisposing factor. Okay, from the history, you know, from the very beginning. Suppose this patient is having the fever with irritative cough. What it indicates? Is there any indication? Or the patient doesn't have any cough, irritative cough. Okay. Then we should keep in our mind, can it be something else? So if the patient is having the irritative cough on the 5th post-op day, we should keep in our mind the possibility of the chest infection or
Definitely.
possibility of the lower lobe some consolidation or possibility of some leakage from where there is some collection in the subdiaphragmatic region for which he is having irritative cough, or he might have and the right shoulder pain. Okay, so whenever you are
Yes.
trying to, whenever this scenario, this sort of scenario is given to you, you are supposed to take the proper history as mentioned by Makhanda. So you should assess the patient properly in that way. You should take the proper history, then you should do the general survey, and then you come to the abdominal examination. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So suppose the patient is having irritative cough, then what will be your next step?
So if the patient is having an irritative cough, I would first like to rule out the chest infection. I would assess first I'll take history of any prior respiratory discomfort of the patient, whether he has any history of COPD, asthma, or any related respiratory diseases.
Yes.
And then I would also like to examine his chest by listening to his breath sounds to rule out any adventitious breath sounds or any crepitus if present. And then I would also like to further investigate with a chest X-ray.
Good.
Okay. Now, before chest X-ray, so we should go for chest X-ray. Okay, fine, no problem. But suppose the patient is having, so in a right hemicolectomy, patient was catheterized. You didn't remove the patient as because the patient is not well nourished. So is there any difference in that case?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we said that normally we are supposed to remove catheter within the 48 hours. Okay, so we are not removing as because the patient is not ambulatory, patient is malnourished, patient is very weak. That's why catheter is there. So in that case also, we should keep in our mind the whether the patient is having any other thing along with, that is the any other thing means the cause of infection is urinary tract infection or something else. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then
come to the wound infection management part. What are the markers when you examine the wound? What are the markers to say that yes, this patient might have some wound infection? What do you look for in the wound?
So basically, we'll be looking for signs of any inflammation or
Yes.
any pus discharge. So that
inflammations like what?
Inflammations, maybe there will be signs of like redness.
Yes.
Signs of redness, induration, and locally raised temperature might be there.
Yeah.
And it will be very tender, sir. Basic signs of rubella, calor, and pyrus, sir.
Yes.
Yeah. So that is the thing. Look, inspection will see whether there is any signs of inflammation or there is any pus discharge. On palpation, we should see the turgidity of the tissue, as because we know if there is some collection, so that area will draw fluid and ultimately that will be turgid. If it is turgid, so whenever you will press it, you will see, whenever you will touch it, local temperature will be raised, but whenever you press it, there will be the pain. So, okay. What else? If there is any drain site, as because the right hemicolectomy, there is a controversy. Someone can give the drain, someone might not give drain. If the drain is given, so we shall have to check the drain site as well. Okay?
Yes.
Suppose there is fever is there, mild fever is there, induration is there, local site and tenderness is there. So what you are going to do?
Before that, just a few things about the surgical site infection. How do you define SSI? How do you define a surgical site infection?
So surgical site infection is basically infection is on the surgical site. Infections may be defined as invasion of organisms into the tissue structure.
There are some other criteria also. Invasion of the microorganisms causing wound infection, and the duration is how long it will be the time frame for defining SSI?
So CDC criteria is there, so you must know.
So it is 1 month for
1 month.
soft tissue infection, and if you have used an implant,
Then
this
One
is up
year.
to 1 year.
1 year.
Okay, so any infection in the surgical site within 1 month, and if you use an implant up to 1 year, you call that as SSI. Okay.
Yes.
So
So
what are the types of SSI then?
yes, what are the different types of surgical site infection?
So surgical site infections basically divided into major or a minor surgical site infection.
Apart from this,
Apart from this, maybe superficial, deep,
good.
and
Superficial, deep, and
organ based, sir.
organ or space infection.
Yes.
Organ.
So the other spectrum of SSI. Okay, fine. Then answer Dr. Bhattacharya's question. You find this patient has got some evidence of induration, redness in the wound site. How are you going to proceed? How
So
are you
we'll
going to proceed?
first check if there is any wound, whether there is any discharge, if it's a major surgical site infection or whether there is spontaneous drainage of pus or not from the wound site. Because that also has to relieve, sir, by releasing the tissue sutures to release their pus.
Okay, so you're going to remove 1 or 2 suture. You don't remove the whole suture at the
1 or
first
2
go.
sutures.
You remove 1 or 2
No,
suture at the
only
first go
2
and you
sutures
look for
to-
any discharge. Okay, if there is discharge, what are you going to do? If
So
there is
first of
discharge
all,
from the
I'll
site,
send it for. So when it's discharged, so first of all, I'd like to collect and send it for culture sensitivity.
yes,
And after drainage of that, sir, I would like to start with empirical antibiotic therapy, waiting on the final report from the culture sensitivity to start the appropriate suitable antibiotic.
just give me one answer. Suppose you think this is a superficial SSI. Is it mandatory to start the patient antibiotics if you are reasonably certain that this is just a superficial site infection?
No, sir.
It's not required. The recommendation is if it is a superficial surgical infection, initially antibiotics may not be required. But if it's a deep surgical infection, deep site infection, then antibiotic has to be started. And how do you decide about what antibiotic you should start in such situation?
So when
There are
we
some
start with,
guidelines.
so we usually start with a broad spectrum antibiotics that provide coverage against both gram positive and gram negative bacteria.
Yeah. What antibiotic? Sir is asking what antibiotic you are supposed to give as because you have done an hemicolectomy. So thing is that before, have you given a prophylactic antibiotic in this case?
So usually we start with a prophylactic dose before the surgery, and after that, sir, post-op also we usually continue that.
Post-op
Yes, sir.
you continue. How many days you will continue? Or you will give at least second dose and then within the 24 hours, then you stop. What is the standard teaching? What we are doing, that is separate issue, but what the standard protocol?
So I think I missed that.
No, what I am talking about, whenever you are doing the right hemicolectomy, do you
Yes.
want to continue as an, are you giving only the prophylactic antibiotic or and continue it for 5 days, 6 days or 7 days, whatever you feel?
What is the
Or
standard recommendation? Nadeem, what is the standard recommendation?
So standard recommendation does not require to continue antibiotics.
Yes.
yes, yes, that should be. So suppose in that case, what sir is said, yes, so you have given the prophylactic antibiotic. Now you have seen this, you have opened up the wound, you have seen there is a dip, that is intramuscular induration and collection is coming from there. Then, or it might be something else as well. So what antibiotic you will give considering this right hemicolectomy?
So in this group, since it might be a large colonies there, so there might be anaerobic infection as well. But we have to rule out gram positive and gram negative bacteria. So we'll give a broad spectrum antibiotic of the uropenicillin group, like piperacillin.
Okay, piperacillin. So you should keep in your mind, probably this wound has come, probably you have opened up the colon. So colonic bacteria is there. So that's why from there, the infection has come out on either on the wound side, or there might be some collection inside. We'll come later on that one. So if it is the deep-seated wound, so in that case, you should continue. Not only you should continue, you should check before that the how much in duration. So normally 2 centimeter in duration will be there, 1 to 2 centimeter in duration if it is superficial. If it is deep, 4 to 5 centimeter in duration might be there. Along with that, while you are examining your patient, you might see that a big lumpy swelling in the right side of the incision or the right ileal fossa, whatever may be the thing. The thing is that, so you should start empirically whatever you say, okay, but that is piperacillin tazobactam you can add, and along with that, so along with that, do you want to give any other antibiotic?
So
imidazole group. Okay, you add imidazole group. Then after 48 hours, when the culture and sensitivity will come, if you say it is sensitive, then you should continue this. For how many days you want to continue?
So at least it is said antibiotics should begin with 3 to 4 days, and to check whether the infection is coming down or not. And sir, if it is not coming down, sir, it will only cause resistance to this antibiotic. So we have to change the antibiotic, hike the antibiotic then, sir.
That is, the resistance means whenever you are thinking the culture and sensitivity report comes, if you see the whatever antibiotic you are using, it is not sensitive, so you shall have to start according to the sensitivity. You should start the antibiotic.
You have to be antibiotic.
Yeah. Then
what is the duration? What is the duration? If it's a deep infection,
So, around 5 to 7 days, sir.
7 to 10 days is the usual duration. 7 to 10 days.
In suspected bacteremia, sir, we may go to 10 days.
Okay.
Thing is that in case of the deep wound, only antibiotic is not sufficient. So while we are removing the superficial suture, we should check whether the pus is coming from the deep side, that is intramuscular side. So we shall have to, or the sheath is opened or not. If it is sheath is open, so you should keep in your mind probably, or sheath is not open, you will see that from the side of the suture it is coming out. So infection control from that side you should give, actually wash and let the pus come out. And before doing that, you must do some investigation. What investigation you want to do in this case? To diagnose whether it is the muscular or intra-abdominal. That is the cavitary or it is the deep wound.
So to rule out whether there is any deep-seated infection inside the abdominal cavity or not.
No, deep-seated
other than
is not within the cavity. Deep-seated is in the muscle, maximum in the muscle and the subcutaneous tissue. Okay. If you are not sure that it might be intra-abdominal, then in that case, what you want to do?
So in that case, a routine ultrasound may help in diagnosing.
Okay, routine ultrasound. What you want to see in the routine ultrasound?
So look for
the local site or whole abdomen? Ultrasound of the whole abdomen or local site?
So
Suppose I am giving you the clue. Abdomen is not distended. Abdomen is soft. Patient is passing flatus. Patient is tolerating liquids orally. Are you going to do anything? Or if you want to do, what minimum investigation you want to do? And another scenario is, patient was doing well. Patient is not tolerating fluid. Abdomen is distended. So patient is having the fever, thick cough, urine output less. So in that scenario, what you are going to do?
So in the second scenario, sir, there is
No,
possibly some systemic manifestation.
First scenario. Start with the first scenario.
Achha, sir. So in the first scenario, the patient as such is not presenting with any systemic complaints. His only complaint being the localized wound infection. So, sir, I would like to manage that first, and whether if there is any suspicion, sir, an ultrasound may help in diagnosing it, sir, of the abdomen to rule out whether there is any collection starting in the abdomen cavity or not.
See, whenever you have started antibiotic, after starting the antibiotic, if you see that whatever antibiotic you have given, so it is sensitive, then you continue the antibiotic for 5 days and check
Yes,
whether the patient is improving or not. If the patient doesn't improve, and the leukocyte count you have seen, say, and the leukocyte count, there are no other systemic that is shock, nothing is there. So you send the leukocyte count is still raised, then you should keep in your mind whether you will do an ultrasound, okay, to check whether there is collection into the deep-seated. So if you have the collection in the intramuscular area, so you should open that area, one or two sutures, you should cut it and drain the intramuscular abscess or the collection. Okay, if you see that the patient has responded well, so no need of doing any other thing. Okay, and the second scenario.
So in the second scenario, there is since the patient is having systemic complaints, there is a possibly a big chance of having an intra-abdominal collection or pus formation of some sort. So, sir, that has to be ruled out by any imaging like a USG or a CT scan.
Which one you will prefer? Suppose the patient is not poor and all the facilities government is taking care of that. So which one you will do? USG or CT scan? And if what you want to do and why?
So basically, USG is the first step of every examination.
USG is extension of clinical examination, but for evaluation of this patient, your answer should be CT scan. CT scan can give a better delineation of internal collection, and with what ultrasound cannot estimate the exact amount. So better should be, the answer should be a CT scan.
CT scan. Suppose the patient doesn't have any symptom, you have given antibiotic, so patient is passing stool and the patient is tolerating foods orally, but even then patient is telling, yes, doctor, I am still tired, and patient developed irritative cough, okay, and
yes,
patient is, even if the patient is tolerating orally, so what you should keep in your mind? So one, I have added irritative cough, and you have put your stethoscope on the right base, and you have seen the breath sound is diminished, Krebs is there. What are you going to do? So you didn't do the CT scan. Okay, so you have seen, you have given antibiotic, patient is doing fine, okay, tolerating solids, but still fever is persisting, swinging rise of the temperature is there, and patient developed irritative cough, and you have examined your patient, so you have put your stethoscope on the right base, Krebs is there, and the sound is diminished, breath sound is diminished. Then what suspicion you have now?
The patient is probably starting to have a respiratory tract infection, sir.
Okay, respiratory tract infection. Besides this, as because you have done the right hysterectomy, so what are the other possibilities?
Any intra-abdominal cause for such respiratory manifestation?
Yes, so there might be an intra-abdominal collection that may be irritating the diaphragm also.
Yes.
Yeah, that should be the answer. Diaphragm.
Subphrenic abscess.
Subphrenic abscess. Suppose you have seen a subphrenic abscess which is multi-septate. Okay, multiple septations are there. in that scenario, what you are going to do?
So a multi-septate collection, so then it has to be drained, sir.
Okay, yes, you will drain. But suppose it is unilocular abscess, so it should be drained as well. But what is the basic difference between the multiseptate and the unilocular?
So unilocular aspirate site can be percutaneously aspirated. So but in multilocular it will be difficult to aspirate it percutaneously, sir. And so it has to be opened and drained.
So opened or drained. Suppose you have done the laparoscopic right hemicolectomy.
Yes, sir.
So what you are going to do? You will open, or will think of any other, that is, you will keep in your mind, yeah, I might require the opening up of the abdomen, but do you want to do something before that? As because you have done laparoscopic.
So based on the culture center of the pus, we may try to use antibiotics.
No, everything is given. Thing is that whenever you have done the lap hemicolectomy, so you can have a try. You should keep in your mind, I can introduce the scope again. I can try it. Okay, I can try it to introduce the scope and check it if space is there. So I can easily enter the subphrenic space. Then it is possible. That is, laparoscopically, drainage is much easier than opening up of the abdomen and drainage of the subphrenic collection. Okay.
So if you think of a management of a subphrenic collection, the answer should be initially start with antibiotics, review the patient. If it is a unilocular collection, you can go for image-guided aspiration and placement of a pigtail catheter, or you may go for either a laparoscopic drainage or open drainage. So these are the sequence of management for a subphrenic abscess.
Yes.
Suppose this patient doesn't have any irritative cough. The patient is having temperature, along with that loose motion. Okay, patient is passing stool 4 or 5 times. So you should keep in your mind, if you do an extra examination in that case, what is that? Mucus, stool, fever.
What might be the reason for this? First, think of the possibilities. Patient having fever in the post-op scenario, patient having diarrhea.
So maybe a pelvic infection.
Pelvic abscess. So how clinically you can ascertain that? How clinically you can ascertain diagnosis of pelvic abscess?
So by rectal examination,
yes.
Sir,
What do you find?
I'll rule out.
What do you find?
So whether there
what
is
in digital examination
bogginess.
will point to diagnosis of a pelvic collection?
So whether I could feel any bogginess or sorry, boggy collection.
And apart from this boggy
apart
collection,
from that,
there will be extreme tenderness.
Tenderness also, sir. From that
extreme
point.
tenderness on rectal examination. So these are the 2 pointers for diagnosis. Then what is the next step? Patient has got a significant pelvic collection. What should be the next step for management?
So here also we'll try to assess the size of the collection by imaging, and then subsequently drain it, sir.
Yeah.
Because collection always leads to further infection.
So how you can drain this one? What should be the approach?
So if the collection can be felt very near by a peer examination, we can by a laparoscopic approach or an open approach, or by a percutaneous drain.
That is not last. Nadeem, try to understand. You start with the minimal invasive and then go to the open next. So first will be image guided aspiration. And then laparoscopic or open. Don't say image guided at the end of your discussion. So image guided should be the first option.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Suppose you have checked, even you have opened up the local site, so you can see there is fecal matter is coming. Okay, so that can happen. Is it?
Yes, sir.
Then what you are going to do and how you are managing this case?
So the scenario of anastomotic leak.
Yes, sir. So stool coming to the wound site, sir, it suggests that there is a leakage from the anastomotic side.
Yes.
Then, sir, for that, sir, first of all, the patient has to be managed conservatively by starting him on TPN and complete NPM. And for the wounds,
patient needs evaluation. This patient needs again evaluation. Further, what evaluation is important? Patient, Dr. Bhattacharya said there is feculent discharge from the wound. So if the feculent discharge is just a discharge from the wound and rest of the abdomen is fine, there is no systemic symptoms, he is fine otherwise, that is one scenario. Second scenario is he has systemic signs of sepsis, he has got generalized abdominal tenderness and rigidity, and the feculent discharge. The management is different in the two group of patients. What is what?
Okay, sir.
Yeah, you will give answer. I'm sure. Sir has given you the 2 division 2 scenario. So you will.
So in the first scenario, there is only one part it's coming.
Sir, he's given you hints. Localized. It is not generalized. There is no systemic signs and symptoms of any sepsis. Then
you see, management will vary depending on the extent of leakage, and this leakage is a controlled leakage or is an uncontrolled leakage with a spread in the generalized peritoneal cavity. So if it is just a simple feculent discharge to the wound, patient is not having other systemic signs of sepsis, no evidence of generalized peritonitis. So in that case, you can wait and watch the patient.
Yes.
Okay. You give the patient antibiotics, do an ultrasound and a CT scan to exclude interval collection, and then continue. And based on that, your decision will vary. But if the patient has got on the 4th or 5th post-op day, patient has got generalized peritonitis, patient having systemic signs of sepsis, what should be the option in this situation? There is evidence of generalized fecal peritonitis. What should be your decision?
So in that case, it has to be opened, sir. The abdomen has to be open, and
why? Why need to open?
So
why is the decision that need to open?
So because the patient is deteriorating because of the anastomotic leak, and there is frank peritonitis, which cannot be tolerated.
So there might be collection in the saprophrenic space, in the gutter, in the pelvis. So you need to do a thorough lavage. And on exploration, you find there is partial disruption of the anastomotic site. What should be your decision for that? You find there is partial disruption, not the whole anesthesia is broken down. There is partial disruption of the anastomotic site. What should be the best decision on your part? You are on table. What are you going to do?
So best decision would so we should go for a stoma. If you know the patient.
Very good. Don't say I will reswitch this anastomotic breakdown.
Primary repair because
reswitching of this breakdown is not going to work. Okay. So in that case, you try to externalize this segment, or you can do a proximal diversion. So there is no point repairing this and putting it back into the peritoneal cavity. It might leak again. So that is a decision. Okay. Fine.
Okay. Another scenario I am giving you. Suppose patient is doing fine, little bit of fever, no cough, no loose motion. Patient is tolerating well, but you have operated in a malnourished patient as because the patient is having the CSC come. Patient is having discharge from the main wound from 5 to 7 days, and it is serosanguinous. You have checked no pus is there. So what are the possibilities you should keep in your mind in that case? serosanguinous discharge from the one margin. Patient might have some tachycardia, minimal fever. So what you can keep in your mind?
So would like to keep in
It is
mind,
not
since
an
it's
infection. So keep in that way, it is not an infection, it is other than
There
infection.
has been a lead. Patient is malnourished. A malnourished patient on 5th or 6th post-op day, serous discharge from the wound suggests one important thing.
Serous or serosanguinous discharge, what it will
What is
suggest?
that? Woundation, sir.
Woundation, good. Or burst abdomen.
Burst abdomen.
Good. Dr. Bhaksha, we can ask some discussion on the wound infections part itself. Nadeem, what
Yes,
are the determinants of a post-operative wound infection? What decides? There are some factors described as the determinants of wound infection in a surgical patient. What are the broad determinants?
Determinants, like the risk factors that may cause wound infection.
Before risk factors, there are three determinants of wound infection. One is the agent, the bacteria. The bacteria, type of bacteria, the virulence of the bacteria, and the dose of the inoculum.
Yes.
Second is the environment.
Environment and
Site
the
you are operating. You are operating in a clean environment, contaminated or dirty environment, or the environment of the theater, the air quality of the theater, the surgical team itself. Okay?
Yes.
And then the host factors. Host factors, the immunity, the nutritional status. Okay?
Again,
so these are the three broad
modifiable.
factors.
Yes.
There are three broad factors which determine wound infection. If I ask you a theoretical question, finding bacteria in the wound always does not indicate that is wound infection. So how do you define contamination, colonization, and infection? What is the difference between the three terms? What do you mean by contamination, colonization, and infection?
Contamination means when the infected bacteria is present but not causing clinical picture with it. So
no. Then how do you define colonization? You know that? If I'm not doing, I am answering. Contamination is presence of bacteria in the wound without the bacteria being multiplied. That is contamination. When you find these bacteria in the wound which is multiplying, we call that as colonization. And when the bacteria is there in the wound with multiplication, and you find there is a host response to that. Host response may be the signs of inflammation. Host response may be systemic sepsis. Okay? Then you call that an infection. Okay? So, contamination, colonization, and infection are three different terms. What do you mean by a term described properly as necrotizing fasciitis? What do you mean by necrotizing fasciitis?
So necrotizing fasciitis is a type of specialized local wound infection.
What is that?
Also known as
local means what? You mean it will confine to the your operated site?
It limited the operative site, but it spread, sir, in the all directions, sir.
Then how can you limit the operative site? What is the basic definition of necrotizing fasciitis? It's a type of deep SSI.
Abdominal gangrene.
It's a deep spreading SSI, which is a life-threatening situation. In a post-op patient, how will you diagnose necrotizing fasciitis? How will you diagnose necrotizing fasciitis in the post-op scenario?
Makunda, এর আগে আমরা জিজ্ঞেস করি what are the bacteria which are involved in necrotizing fasciitis?
Okay, yes.
It might be multiple, that is a different strain. It might be a single strain, but in the surgery while we are doing, so what are the things? Suppose in this case, in this scenario, you can get a necrotizing fasciitis. And then you have done the CSECAM right hemicolectomy, so you can get the necrotizing fasciitis. And that is known as the infection of anterior abdominal wall. which is known as Melanie syndrome.
Melanie syndrome.
Yes.
Yes.
And if they have done any operation in the perineum or the scrotum, that terminology is separate, but that is also necrotizing fasciitis. So
Yes,
that
sir.
necrotizing fasciitis, this is known as the Fournier's gangrene.
Fournier's
And
gangrene.
then necrotizing fasciitis can develop in the limbs as well. So what are the bacteria involved in necrotizing fasciitis? So as because sir is telling you, so two components should be there, or the single component. Sir is telling it is the rapidly engulfing the muscles, that is necrotizing the muscles as well. So it should be a combination of what are the bacteria?
So mainly it's a mixture of coliforms as Staphylococcus bacteroides.
E. coli. That is a combination of E. coli, Staphylococcus, Streptococcus.
Multi-organism.
This is known as the synergism. That is, whenever there is synergism of, suppose aerobic bacteria. Aerobic bacteria, they are utilizing the fat and all these things. So
Yes.
they are producing the necrosis of that area. On the top of that, anaerobic infection goes on. So this is a rapidly spreading inflammation, and that is synergism of the multiple bacteria.
How you diagnose? What are the diagnostic points you will find in a patient who has got necrotizing fasciitis? Because this is a first clinical diagnosis. No investigation will give a diagnosis. This is purely a clinical diagnosis, and based on that, we have to act. Otherwise, you lose the patient. What are the pointers?
So the patient is almost always immunocompromised, sir. Immunocompromised patients are at a higher risk of this infection. Usually, sir, the initiating infection may have been a very minor infection, but starts become very severe very suddenly.
Give me the clinical pointers for diagnosis.
Systemic.
Clinical.
What are the systemic
signs of spreading inflammation with crepitus?
Don't come to the local. These patients have some systemic symptoms and signs. Patient may have fever. Patient will look toxic. Patient will have tachycardia. Patient may have features of septic shock. And then come to the local site. What? Because most of these, it may not be revealed at the first go. But what are the important local signs you will find in necrotizing fasciitis? So it's a very common finding in the post-op scenario. If you start with minimal to very severe manifestation, what are the local manifestations?
So that is only, sir. Like crepitus will be present, sir.
Crepitus is late. The first is what? Induration. There is a large area of edema. Induration edema. Tenderness. There may be skin blisters. There may be skin blisters. Okay?
Yes.
And then at the depth, you will have necrotizing infection of the deep fascia and the muscles. Okay, so these are the local signs.
So that is why you have done an operation near the scrotum in the morning. So in the evening round, when you have gone, you have checked, the patient is still having fever and patient is telling the sir, I'm having tenderness over the lower abdomen. So if you put your hand, you will see that area is hot. Induration, tenderness is there. So you should immediately think of probably it is the necrotizing fasciitis. So what you are going to
management? What is the management? You have diagnosed these patients have got deep space infection, likely to be necrotizing fasciitis. What are the mainstay of treatment in patient has got necrotizing fasciitis?
So we will start with broad spectrum antibiotic therapy, but the mainstay of the treatment should be complete excision of the necrotic tissue.
So it will be
an extensive
wide incision and debridement. That is the mainstay of treatment. So you have to open up the skin, you have to debride the dead tissue. Okay, that is the mainstay of treatment. Otherwise, patient has spreading infection and death. I think Dr. Bhattacharya, we can have some audience participation and then we go for the operative part.
Okay. Okay.
Any question from the audience? Dr. Acharji, any comment? Dr. Acharji? Dr. Acharji, any comment? Dr. Maiti is there. Yeah,
Professor,
yeah.
Professor Shah and Professor Bacharia, excellent coverage, excellent covering of the subject. But for the student, I think whenever he is asked about assessment of any patient, he should start with first physical examination, general examination, local examination, systemic examination. Very often students only start with the local examination.
Yeah.
I think this has to be stressed on the students that one should start with general examination first. Otherwise, say, for example, in this particular patient, you cannot find in local examination. So always start with general examination, local examination, systemic examination, then only jump on to the investigations. I think that should be stressed on each and every patient, every student.
Dr. Maiti. Dr. Maiti, please.
Saha.
Yes.
And, Dr. Bhattacharya, I have no words to express the thanks to both of you and the student Nadim, because the subject was covered so nicely. I hope the residents have been immensely benefited by the discussions. It was very systematic, and almost everything is covered. I hope it was a very useful and fruitful presentation and discussion. Thank you. And Professor Acharya, Anadi, how are you? And you have rightly pointed out the important aspects that the students should remember during the presentation.
One question is, what test you want to do before image guided test? I don't understand the question, but image guided aspiration you want to mean. First of all, you have to diagnose there is a deep collection, and the deep collection is diagnosed by ultrasound, but standard of care is to do a CT scan. CT scan give a better delineation of the intermittent collection, the amount of collection. Ultrasound often miss small collection, and a large collection often is taken as very small collection. So to assess internal collection, the best invasion should be a CT scan.
And one point I would like to also mention, Professor Saha, in the setting where the CT scan is not available, but ultrasonography is available everywhere almost. But in that case, if you suspect it is a subdermatic abscess, a straight X-ray abdomen is sometimes very, very useful.
Yes, we missed it.
Not only that indicates the free gas under diaphragm in the presence of leakage at the site of anastomosis, but also if there is, even if there is no leakage, only the abscess with the air fluid level within the abscess cavity on the right, particularly on the right side, gives a good idea about the presence of subdermatic abscess. So we should not ignore that simple X-ray, straight X-ray abdomen erect view.
Yes, very right. Dr. Boshak, please. Dr. Boshak. Dr. Boshak, any comment? He has raised hand. Okay, Dr. Bhattacharya, we can proceed to the hernia operative steps.
Yeah.
Dr. Nadim, describe the steps of a right inguinal hernioplasty by Liechtenstein technique. You describe the steps. As I said, try to describe in salient points, not a paragraph only.
Okay, sir. So the first point, the indication for this being a right-sided inguinal hernia may be direct or an indirect. So the patient will be in spinal anesthesia preferably, and the position of the patient will be supine, standing on the side of the hernia. The first, I will decide my incision. So my incision will begin from the pubic tubercle and laterally, sir, going beyond the deep ring to above and parallel, 2 centimeters above and parallel to it at an inclined angle. Then, sir, after division of the superficial and the deep facial layers of the camper and fascia, we will reach up to the external oblique epineuritis.
Okay.
In that,
Before,
we make a nick and then.
just a minute, Nadim, please. You have
Yes, yes.
before external oblique epineuritis, there will be the bleeding vessels. Okay. So what are the bleeding vessels you might get?
Yes, sir. So the superficial epigastric vessel is the most important that we have to deal here. Along, other than that, sir, also the superficial circumflex iliac and the superficial external pudendal vessel may also come in the field.
Okay, superficial circumflex iliac might not come as because if you give the small incision. Okay. Okay, fine. Then proceed.
Then, sir, after reaching up to the external oblique epineuritis, we will now open up the inguinal canal by making a nick in the external oblique epineuritis and extending medially and splitting up the superficial ring and laterally up to the going just beyond the deep ring.
Okay.
Where, sir, we expose the we open up the inguinal canal.
Best. While you are cutting or splitting the external oblique epineuritis, what precaution you should take? Suppose you are incising it by the scissor, so you are introducing it. Okay. So what can be the problems if you cut it blindly without seeing anything?
So we might injure the ilioinguinal nerve.
Very good. Then proceed.
Yes, sir. So then after opening, so we open up beyond, we open the external oblique, upper flap, we go up till the conjoint tendon is exposed and lower till the inguinal ligament is exposed. And after proper exposure of the inguinal canal, so then we proceed to dissection of the hernial sac. For that, so we proceed our fingers on both direction and try to pull off the hernial sac from the floor, that is the fascia transversalis, and try to pull up the hernial sac, and then sir, we try to dissect between our fingers using a finger gauge, the spermatic cord and the hernial sac.
Okay, which one you will pull first? Lateral aspect, deep ring towards the deep ring or towards the superficial ring? You are trying to separate the inguinal, that is from the transversalis fascia, the cord structure, from where you should start. From the medial side or from the deep side, but that is lateral side.
Medial side, sir.
Medial. So why?
So because the hernial sac, the fundus might be present there, because since it's progressing there.
No. That is the loose areolar tissue and it is the avascular. If you go and pull from the lateral aspect, so even you might land up in a torrential bleeding, as because there is some branches of the occasional you might get from the inferior epigastric, one branch is coming to supply the cremaster. So you must be cautious while you are lifting off the cord from the fascia transversalis. Okay, proceed, please.
Yes, sir.
You have lifted it up, then from the pubic tubercle or the pubis, then what you are going to do?
So we'll try to separate between our fingers the spermatic cord and the hernial sac, taking care not to injure the testicular vessels or the vas deferens.
Any other now? Any other now you might get in? Yeah.
So genital branch or genital femoral nerve.
Yes. Proceed.
So
now where you will try to find out the sac, from the medial aspect of your incision or at the near the deep ring? Do you understand my question?
Yes, sir.
You have lifted up the cord, then you will try to separate the sac from the cord structure.
By dividing the cremasteric muscles.
Yeah, you will divide in the cremasteric muscle where you should do. It is on the medial incisional line, that is the medial aspect of your wound, or the lateral aspect of your wound. Do you understand my question?
Yes,
that
sir.
Is near to deep ring. That is, answer should be, I should try to separate the sac from the other cord structure near to deep ring.
Yes.
Okay. Why? as because if you give the long incision, so you are trying to separate the sac from the medial aspect, then you shall have to come up to the lateral end, that is toward the deep ring. Then extensive dissection might produce an injury to the vessels and nerves. So it is mandatory. So we should separate the sac more close to the deep ring. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Then proceed.
So after separating the sac from the cord structures, yes, sir. After separating the sac from the cord structures, the main thing will be the herniatomy and reduction of the contents of the sac.
No.
Here
You
we have
should
to keep
take
one thing.
decision. See, you should take decision by seeing one vessel, whether it is a direct hernia or indirect hernia. You should.
Okay, sir. Okay, so
Yeah.
okay. So considering that it was not established whether it was
Yes.
direct or indirect.
No,
Interpretively,
even if you establish, it is probably an indirect component is there. So you must check whether the direct component is there or not. Okay.
yes, sir.
So, or it might be the pantolon hernia. Two sac will be there. So in between some vessel will be there. So you shall have to check that one, and then only you will see that it is the direct hernia or indirect hernia. What is the name of that vessel?
So it is the inferior epigastric artery.
Very good. Proceed.
Yes, sir. Then after identifying the sac and separating it from the rest of the somatic cords, I will now do a herniotomy and reduce the contents. First, ruling out whether it is a sliding hernia or not. And then after reduction of the contents, the hernial sac is reduced. And after recentering of the deep ring, we place a mesh.
So how can you guess or can you get an idea whenever you are thinking to separate the sac from the cord structure, you will see the lot of fatty tissue is there. You are not getting the sac. Whatever you are trying to separate, to check to find out the sac, the oozing is there and a lot of fatty tissue there. What it signifies? Whatever you said, then probably it is a case of sliding hernia. As because the sliding hernia component, mostly the sac is small, but extraperitoneal fat is more. So whenever you are trying to separate, identify the sac, you will see that the sac is minimum, or you are not getting the sac, you are getting only the fat and fat and fat. You're trying to separate, there is oozing. So hell. So identifying the sac is very difficult. Whenever you will feel it is becoming difficult to identify the sac, so you should keep in your mind that probably it is a case of sliding hernia. And you should keep, if you examine, suppose I am not examining the patient. So someone my PGT has examined the patient. So I might miss, or PGT might miss, the neck of the sac whenever it is wide, okay, and it is easily going. So you should keep in your mind possibility of the sliding hernia is there. Okay, please proceed.
So then after proper anatomy reduction of the contents of the sac.
Suppose the sac is big enough, okay, it has gone up to the scrotum.
Achha.
That is the complete sac. What you are going to do in this case? Are you trying to separate the entire sac from the cord structure, or you won't separate the sac from the cord structure entirely? Can you follow my question?
The entire separation, since it's going up to, yes, sir.
Okay.
So this being a complete hernia, sir, we do not need to necessarily separate the whole of the hernial sac. So the mainstay being to herniatomy and reduction of the contents, which is more important than reducing the sac itself. So the fundus part may be left there, but so the contents have to be completely reduced inside.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll keep the distal sac open. Don't close it. Just check whether there is any bleeding from the distal sac margin. So you cauterize that, and if possible, give an incision to open or lay out the anterior layer only. No, don't do more than that. So
Yes.
you have ligated, and then whenever you are ligating, where you will put suture. That is, you shall have to identify something that is known as the neck of the sac. Is it?
Yes, sir.
So how you will identify the neck of the sac?
So it will be the most constricted part.
Okay.
And there will be, sir, pardon, sir?
This is number one, constricted part. And second,
So there will also be a collar of fat around it, sir.
very good, very good. Very good. Proceed. So whenever you are
And
tying the sac, so just up to the neck, don't pull the peritoneum too much. If you pull the peritoneum too
Yes,
much beyond the sac, neck of the sac, then postoperative pain will be more. So keep in your mind. Okay.
And the vessel. In the neck, you find the
inferior
inferior vessel crossing. There are 3 points. There are 3 points to identify the neck of the sac. The constricted part, the color of fat pad, and the inferior vessel crossing the neck of the sac.
Vessel. Then proceed.
So then after power reduction of the sac, so we'll now re-strengthen it by placing a mesh.
Yeah.
Posterior
Okay.
wall is re-strengthened by placing a polypropylene mesh.
Okay. So you can re-strengthen it. If the direct sac is there, you will plicate it. If direct sac is not there, so how you are going to place the mesh? Why we are putting mesh in a case of hernia repair? And what is the basic principle of application of mesh?
So the mesh provides a fold also for growth of tissue. Along with that, it provides a re-strengthening layer.
Okay.
For the posterior wall.
What is the basic principle of Liechtenstein? Liechtenstein basic principle is tensionless. You don't oppose conjugate tendon to the inguinal ligament. You don't create any apposition which will create some tension. So you just place the mesh, bridge the gap, and attach the mesh to the lower side inguinal ligament above the conjugate tendon. So this is a tensionless repair. The basic principle is repair without any tension.
So now what are the things you should keep in your mind while you are placing the mesh? The mesh size will be equal to the gap size. The mesh size will be a bit more than the gap size. That is, I am wanting to tell you that you should know how much of the overlap you should give in the medial aspect, in the lateral aspect, below and above.
Yes, sir.
Can you follow my question?
Yes, sir. So it should cover the whole of the defect, sir.
Suppose defect size.
The mesh should be more covered.
Okay, defect size. So suppose the defect is 3 centimeter. Okay. So how much mesh you are putting there? That is, the width is 3 centimeter. So how much the width of the mesh you are supposed to place? Do you understand my point?
So the gap being in the deep ring, sir. The defect.
No.
Nadeem,
Yes, sir.
in inguinal hernia, where is the medial extent of the mesh you place? Where is the lateral extent of the mesh you place? What is above? What is below? What is the extent? The gap is between the conjugate tendon and the inguinal ligament. You are not bothered about the gap. We place a mesh. Standard mesh you take is 15 by 7.5. And why do you place the mesh? Medially, how far you go? Medially.
So medially, sir, one corner is fixed near the pubic tubercle, and medially most it is fixed to the rectus, lateral part of the rectus sheath.
Rectus sheath. So medially rectus sheath.
Yes.
Below?
So below it is sutured with the inguinal ligament, sir.
Good. Above?
Above, sir, with the conjoint fibers of the conjoint.
No, it's not only the gap. You don't place the mesh only on the gap. You are placing a mesh which is beyond the gap.
Yeah.
Medially extending out of the rectus sheath, below up to the inguinal ligament, above the conjugate tendon. And how to tackle the mesh laterally?
So laterally, the mesh is cut, slit for a lower 1/3 and upper 2/3 position.
Okay, fine. You will do
encompass
that.
the somatic cord.
So from the dick ring, what
Pardon,
extra?
sir?
So you will make and slit, no problem. We will make and slit, but how much of length of extra mesh you are supposed to plate beyond the deep ring? As because your mesh size is 15 centimeter. Do you follow my question? At least the 5 to
sir.
7 centimeter of the mesh beyond the deep ring we are supposed to keep.
Yeah.
Okay.
This almost goes up the anterosepaliac spine. Once you make the space, the lateral end of the mesh reaches almost up the anterosepaliac spine. Okay.
It is 5 to 7 centimeter. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
While you are placing the mesh and
5%.
fixing the mesh in the upper aspect, what nerve you might get? That is while, what precaution you should take while fixing the mesh in the upper end?
On content tendon, what nerve you find?
Ilioinguinal,
No?
Yes. Ilioinguinal.
iliohypogastric.
Right.
Yes.
Right. You are.
Right. Then proceed, please. While fixing the mesh
So
on
then
the
after
left,
fixing,
yeah, proceed, please.
so after proper fixing of the mesh on the all four aspects encompassing, then after that, so we will close the external oblique, making sure to keep medially a gap which will form the new superficial ring.
Good.
Okay.
And then subsequently we'll close the layers of the superficial subtissue and the skin.
Always we should keep in our mind while we are taking the bite, that is fixing the mesh to the inguinal ligament laterally, you should keep in your mind as because the ilioinguinal nerve is there, so take care so that we are not taking bite on the ilioinguinal nerve. That is, so it should not come in the suture, as because if it comes, the postoperative pain will be more. Okay? Okay,
Yes,
then.
sir.
Okay,
Then-
Nadeem, you said you will transfix the neck of the sac. But with a sliding hernia, having a visca in the posterior wall, how are you going to manage the neck area? You cannot transfix the neck and excise the sac. So how do you manage
sir.
a sliding hernia?
So in that case, we will have to reduce the sac. If you open it and see if the sliding components are,
It
we'll
is
try
there.
to remove. If
Sliding
it
component is
there,
there.
sir,
You
we will
cannot ligate the neck of the sac now.
We cannot, sir. We cannot like it. So then we'll have to reduce it in and take bites in the deep ring to reach tenderness.
Yes. So in that case, you excise the redundant sac, close the sac beyond the sliding component, dissect around the deep ring, reduce this sac in the periperitoneal space, and narrow the deepening. What is that operation called as? The sutures you use for narrow the deep ring is known as one repair. What is the repair? Narrowing the deep ring by sutures is called as what? This is Little's repair. This is Little's repair.
Just repair, sir. Little.
Okay, so you can narrow the deep ring. So it will be different. Dr. Neha asked third point of indication neck of the sac. I already described the point for neck of the sac is this is the most constituted part of the sac. There is a collar of fat pad, and you find the epigastric vessel crossing the neck of the sac. So that is the site for neck. Third point is inferior vessel crossing the neck. I think we can have audience interaction. Any question from the audience?
Dr. Professor Saha,
Yes, Dr. Mike.
comment.
Yes.
Actually, for the students, remember in the repair of hernia, 3 nerves are to be protected. Out of these, ilioinguinal nerve and iliohypogastric nerve has been discussed. But remember, never search for the genital branch of the genitourinary nerve.
Yeah.
That is a very thin nerve, and if you protect the artery to the cremaster, which lies deep to the spermatic cord, if you protect that vessel, automatically the genital branch of the genitourinary nerve is protected. So no need of searching the genital branch of the genitourinary nerve. And when you are ligating the sac, then you should not remain too close to the deep ring. particularly when the sac is very thin. Once there is a tear in the sac, if the sac margin recedes to the peritoneal cavity, it will be very difficult to close the sac. So remain at a safe distance away from the deep ring for dissection. Then you identify the sac circumferentially and ligate. That will be easier. And when you are taking the bite and or fixing the mesh to the inguinal ligament, particularly laterally, remember that is the part where there is chance of injury to the femoral vessels. So there is no risk at the medial part because that is a safe area, but in the lateral part it is unsafe for the big vessels as well as for the ilioinguinal nerve, as Professor Bhattacharya has already mentioned. Thank you. And when you are taking bite or fixing the mesh to the surface of the conjoint tendon, before fixing, as once you place the mesh on the surface of the conjoint tendon, you cannot see from surface of the mesh where the nerve is. So predefine the position of the ilioinguinal nerve and set your mind where you will fix the mesh on the surface of the conjoint tendon. Otherwise, there is risk of taking the iliohypogastric nerve in the bite. And another question you should remember in the exam, sometimes the laparoscopic surgeon claim that laparoscopic repair is better than the open repair. Can you tell me why they claim the laparoscopic repair is better than open? In which way, and what are the points in favor that you can claim that laparoscopic repair is better? On the other way, it is also reverse. The open surgeon will claim that it is better than laparoscopy. So you just prepare yourself theoretically what are the points, merits and demerits of both the surgery. Okay, in laparoscopic surgery, the mesh is placed, one point I am telling, the mesh is placed behind the conjoint tendon. So the muscle buttress works or gives supports to the mesh. But here in the Lichtenstein method, the mesh is placed superficial to the conjoint tendon. But by the open method, you can modify the Lichtenstein by placing the mesh even from anterior dissection. You can modify, there are different techniques by which you can also place the mesh behind the conjoint tendon.
Yeah, that becomes pre-peritoneal repair.
Pre-peritoneal repair. And actually I have modified this technique as a modified Lichtenstein. In the YouTube video you can see how the mesh can be placed very nicely behind the conjoint tendon. That is the modified Lichtenstein repair TIP, TIPP, transinguinal pre-peritoneal placement of the mesh. That is TIP. You know TAP, you know TP, but there is TIPP, that is transinguinal pre-peritoneal placement of the mesh.
This is also known as Nyhus repair.
No, that is not exactly Nyhus. That is TIPP. That is a separate entity, and that is usually not practiced too much, but that is a very good technique. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Very nice discussion. Thank you, Nadeem.
Thank you,
You
sir.
did well. Very good. Thank you. We meet on Tuesday with case discussion.